and the new man. I want to review just briefly. Now, you'll remember back in chapter 2, verses 1 to 3, that we are told that sinners walk according to the world, the flesh, and the devil. They function according to those three things. Now, here we see an illustration of how that works out. You walk according to the world, the flesh, and the devil, and this is what will happen. And he gives us 4 characteristics of pagan thinking and lifestyle. 4 things based upon wrong thinking. 1 is in verse 17. And this is the first characteristic of an unregenerate, unsaved person who doesn't know God. First, at the end of verse 17, they walk in the emptiness of their mind. And the first characteristic is what I called self-centered emptiness. The unregenerate man resolves everything on the basis of his thinking, his mind. It is his mind that is ultimate. It is what he thinks, what he acquiesces to, what he agrees with that makes the difference. The only problem is that he will follow his mind to emptiness because it is vanity, it is useless, it is aimless, it is pointless, and it is purposeless. Self-centered emptiness is characteristic of our age. It is characteristic of an unregenerate man. He's going nowhere, full of sound and fury, but signifying absolutely nothing. If a man operates on a mind that doesn't have God's thoughts, and all he's got is his own thoughts, it's going nowhere. It's useless. It's empty, and it's vain. Second thing, where there is a useless, empty, and vain mind, there will be ignorance of the truth. And that's the second characteristic of a godless person in verse 18. Their understanding is darkened. They are alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that's in them and because of the hardness of their heart. That word is hardness. In other words, when a person says, I will live and die on the basis of my own mind, I will be the master of my own fate, I will be the captain of my own soul, I will be the determiner of my own destiny, you can be sure he's going to live his whole life in ignorance because man doesn't have any answers. If he cuts himself off in verse 18 from the life of God, if he alienates himself from the life of God, he tears out any possibility of ever knowing the truth. And so the second thing is a willful darkness. Spiritually, he is dead, incapable of knowing the truth. And we showed you last time, implied in this verse, is the terrifying thought that when a person makes a willful choice to base everything on his own mind, and he becomes his own God, and he turns his back on the true God, that after a certain point, God just lets him go. The Old Testament put it this way. God said, Ephraim is joined to idols, let him alone. Romans 1 says God gave them up. He let him go. If a person chooses this, after a certain point, God lets him go. And so, start out with a useless, self-centered mind can only result in ignorance. And such ignorance as dives deeply into sin. And that leads to the third thing, shamelessness. Shamelessness. Verse 19, who being past feeling. You stop right there. Well, listen, if you cut yourself off from the life of God, you will be past feeling any conviction. You will be past sensitivity to sin. You will lose sensation of regret. You will be beyond the reality of shame. And then another thing results. When you're going to live by your own standard in your own mind, in the uselessness of your own mind, you cut yourself off from God, therefore you lose all moral sense, all moral balance, all sense of what's right and wrong, and you do that which is shameless, and the result is you wind up with the fourth characteristic, and that's a reprobate mind, a mind that ceases to function. You have literally seared your conscience. You have burned out your mind. You have torn out of your brain the standards that God has placed there. You have violated conscience to the place where conscience can no longer function. Being past feeling, it says, they have given themselves over unto lasciviousness to work all uncleanness with greediness. Now that's human lifestyle. Not very pretty, is it? Shameless thinking will destroy the mind. All right, now let's go back over it very quickly so you understand it. You start out with doing your thing your way. You think your own thoughts and determine your own destiny. You've cut yourself off from God. As a result, you're going to live in ignorance. That's verse 18. Your heart's going to be blind. Your head's going to be blind. As a result of that blindness, you don't know any morality. And without a morality, you will become shameless and indecent. And you live in shamelessness and indecency long enough, and it burns out any thinking process you had left until you come to the place where you totally give yourself over to lasciviousness and you work uncleanness with greediness. In other words, you can't get enough vileness in your life. You can't dig up enough filth. Now let me look at this word lasciviousness with you for a minute. Lasciviousness is the word asolgeia. It's probably the ugliest word in the New Testament. It's a filthy, vile word, and it's used very often. Here is the essence of asolgeia. It is the person in whose soul dwells so much sin under such total domination that he doesn't care what anybody says. He doesn't care what anybody thinks. He doesn't feel any shock. He has no sense of decency and absolutely no sense of shame. Now, this word rarely ever occurs alone. It usually occurs with other words. In fact, let me give you an idea about that. 3 times, asolgeia is connected with drunkenness. In Galatians 5:19, 1 Peter 4:3, and Romans 13:13. In those 3 passages, it is connected with drunkenness. It is connected with a particular word, komos. Komos originally was a sort of a harmless word. It meant, it referred to a band of friends who accompanied a victor in the games on his way home. Sort of like his pals, his buddies. But as time went on and they were going on their way home, they were laughing and cheering and celebrating the victory. They began to drink, and it became ribald, and it became carousing and reveling and wildness, and it degenerated into some kind of sheer self-indulgent in a public fashion. It literally means brawling in drunkenness. And the asolgeia, the person who is lascivious, is one whose sheer self-indulgence knows no public restriction. He doesn't restrain himself at all in regard to people. It's connected with that kind of ribald drunkenness. Secondly, 4 times this word is connected with adultery or lust and sexual sin. In Mark 7:22, 2 Corinthians 12:21, Galatians 5:19, and 2 Peter 2:18, it is connected with sex sin. And in each case, it has reference to a person who has no more shame than an animal in gratifying his sexual desire. That's where asolgeia fits. It is the kind of lasciviousness that knows only its fulfillment, even if it's an animalistic thing. An asolgeia person has no more conscience about immorality and about sexual gratification than a dog. That's the word. So, 3 times it's connected with ribald drunkenness. 4 times it's connected with a degenerate kind of sexual lust that knows no difference than an animal. And 3 times, here's the 3rd time it's used, 3 times it is used with pleonexia. And it's used with that here. Pleonexia is the word greediness in this verse. And 3 times it is used with such an uncontrollable lust that people don't even know the bounds of it. It's the kind of thing where if you don't give me what I want, I'll rape you to get it, see. It's that completely out of control greed.